And the letter is where you have been through a bad relationship, or even worse, a bad marriage. And I've met people 10, 15 years after a bad marriage who are still bitter. And as a result, they never meet anybody else, and they end up alone for the rest of their lives, because anybody who comes near them is like trying to stroke a porcupine. The first thing that they do is they start to spew all their venom about their bad marriage. And remember, what you dwell upon grows. So the more you think about your bad marriage, the angrier you get, and it just keeps you angry all the time. It's sort of very much like putting hot water onto black tea and letting it steep for a long time. What happens to the water? It gets blacker and blacker and blacker. And the more you dwell on a negative experience, the blacker and blacker your thinking and feeling becomes. So here's how you liberate yourself from a bad relationship. What you do is you write the letter. And the letter has 3 parts. The letter is, I have thought over our marriage relationship, and I forgive you completely for everything that you ever did or said that hurt me in any way. That's the first line. The second line is, to be specific, I forgive you for the following, colon, and you can write down every single thing that you think the person ever did to hurt you. Some people will come up with several pages. The last thing is, I let you go and I wish you well. And then you take the letter and you sign it, and you go down to the mailbox and you mail it. You don't email this, by the way, you have to write it, psychoneuromotor activity, and you mail it. Now here's the most astonishing thing. From the time the letter becomes irretrievable, you drop it in the mailbox and it's gone, suddenly all the negativity of the relationship has vanished. It goes. It's almost like a zapper. As soon as the letter of forgiveness and wishing them well has been mailed, you're free. You're free at last, free at last. And you walk home, and you walk home singing. It's the most astonishing thing. I've had people come back from all over the world say they couldn't believe it. I had this man in my seminar, and he was sitting there, and he was, and you could see he was having some problems. And he came back. It was a 2-day seminar at that time. He came back the next day, and he was smiling, and he was beaming. He said, "He changed my life yesterday." And he said, "Let me tell you what happened." Here's what happened. He and his college buddy formed a business. And they built the business for 10 years, and they built it into a multi-million-dollar business. And they both got married, and they both had children, and they're both the best of friends, and they worked together, and they built this business, and arm in arm, and they were just really successful. And one day, he went to the office, and his partner was gone. And his partner handled all the money, accounting, bookkeeping, and so he just went to work, went home that night, his wife was gone. And what he found was that his partner and his wife had been having an affair. They had carefully closed up everything. He had stripped the company bankrupt, and they had both moved away to the other side of the country. And they had carefully written, he'd signed whatever they put in front of him. You know, we just need this for the bank, and he'd signed it. So he ended up on the hook for everything, and they ended up with all the money, and it was legally untouchable. And then they moved away and left basically 2 families with children, and took all the money, left him bankrupt with I think, two or three children. And was this guy entitled to be a little bit angry? I mean, we're talking smoking here. I mean, he was angry, and he was angry. This happened about 4 years before, and he had to work his buns off for 16 hours a day to save his business. He had to take complete responsibility for his children, and he was just fuming. I mean, his best friend and his wife had stabbed him in the back so deeply, he was entitled to be angry. Would you say? He had not done a thing. He had been an innocent player this whole time. But he came to this seminar, and after he went home, he wrote the letter. He wrote the letter to them. He knew their address. He wrote the letter to their address, and he wrote it to both of them, and said, "I forgive you completely for everything. I forgive you for bankrupting the business and leaving me and blah, 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 and I wish you well. Have a good life." And he dropped the letter. He said, as the letter dropped, it was like the burden had been lifted off of him completely. So sometimes there are things that you can do to unlock that brake on the front wheel of your Mercedes-Benz mind and emotion, and just release it completely. And a letter is very simple. But forgiveness is the most powerful technique ever discovered to free yourself completely from negative emotions, from all the ones in the past and all the ones to the present, and do it on a go-forward basis. So there's never anybody that you're angry with. No matter what they do, you are not going to give them the honor or the right of being angry with them. Is when the movie Patton says, in his opening talk. He said, and I don't want to hear any calls from the front saying we are holding our position. We are not holding our position. He said, we are not retreating. He said, I don't like to pay for the same ground twice. He said, we are moving ahead. We are going to kill the enemy. We're going to go through him like crap through a goose. Remember that movie, Patton? But he said, we're not going to pay for the same ground twice. My point there is that we're not going to have the injury plus pay for it by being negative and unhappy and angry and frustrated and have it affect our lives and the lives of our family. Pay for it with money, pay for it with lost time, but don't pay for it twice. Just pay for it by saying, okay, it happened, I forgive the person completely, and get on with the rest of your life. So I want you to think in your mind, and every time you think of that person, say, I forgive them completely for everything, and I wish them well. And then I say, it's God bless them, I wish them well. I've already forgiven them. God bless them, I wish them well. God bless them, I wish her well. God bless them, I wish them well. Whenever the thought of the person comes up, I just throw a bucket of water on that negative emotion, and it goes out. And in less than a week, it stops coming up. The fire is out. And you think, geez, I was upset about that for weeks, months, years, and it's gone. Because you cannot wish a person to say, God bless them and wish them well without feeling great about yourself. And if you do that, you become completely liberated. And after lunch, we are going to, there's what we've got here. After lunch, we're going to start talking about programming your mind for success. Now we have cleared your mental decks completely. Now let's build an incredible psychological and emotional edifice or building on it that will now allow you to accomplish anything you want in life. Does anybody have any questions from what we talked about this morning? Covered a lot of ground. My daughter is a psychologist, and I said, I'll teach you what you learn in 5 years of a master's program in about 5 hours. And this is what you learn. I'm working on a book now. The working title is Get Over It and Get On With It. And it basically talks about all the things that we talk about in this seminar and all the different ways that you can just drop off the things that are acting as drags on you, which is the old negative experiences and negative memories and so on. And wonderfully enough, there are some really great technologies, mental technologies for that, which you're going to start learning after lunch. And so just ways of your thinking differently, because if you change your thinking, you do change your life, and sometimes instantly. You know, a friend of mine was once asked, how long does it take to develop a new habit? And the question is, they say maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a month, maybe a year. But some habits you can develop instantly. For example, if you sit on a hot stove or put your hand on a hot stove, you'll develop the habit of not putting your hand on a hot stove instantly, and you'll never have to relearn it. So for the rest of your life, with one quick experience, you'll have developed a habit of never putting hands on hot stoves. From now on, you'll check the stove before you put your hand on it. There's a little thing in biology where they talk about if a cat sits on a hot stove and burns itself, that cat will never again sit on a hot stove. You'll learn immediately. But the problem is the cat will never sit on a cold stove either. The cat will never sit on any stove, never take another chance at all around stoves. Human beings are often like that. Often we have one negative experience and we say, that's it, and we won't ever try in that area again. And yet you'll find that most people who are successful have failed so many times they've lost track of it. They just try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. And they don't like to fail. Nobody likes to fail. But they recognize that, well, this is part of the experience. You have to make mistakes in order to learn how to be successful. And so the critical thing is don't make a mistake and then never try something else. You just learn from it, pass on, move ahead, especially in relationships, especially in business. I sometimes will ask an audience, is there anybody here who's been lied to or let down or cheated or betrayed or swindled or badly done by or treated poorly when they were growing up and had a bad childhood, bad marriage, bad relationship, went broke, lost all your money, anybody like that? And by this time, everybody's got their hand up. I say, well, good, get over it. Let's get on with the rest of your life. People are just shocked. You know, wait a minute, I've paid a lot for that suffering. You can't ask me to just give it up. But they think that they have to hold on to it. Like, I paid for that. I own that suffering, and you're not going to talk me out of it. And you start to think, isn't that amazing? They say, like leaning on your hot stove and saying, take your hand off the hot stove. No damn well, no damn way. I'm going to stay here and burn until the skin starts to smolder. Well, why? Well, because I put my hand on this hot stove. And you know the old days where they say, well, if you made a bad marriage, well, you made your bed, you have to lie in it. The idea was that if you made a bad marriage, well, you just stayed in that bad marriage for the rest of your life. I had a woman in my seminar, a very nice woman, attractive woman, about 28. And she came to me at the break, and she'd come by herself. She said her husband, she was gone out with him for about 2 or 3 years, and they'd been married for 2 or 3 years. And she said, you know, you're saying that if the marriage is not working out, or if I'm unhappy, I should think of leaving. Well, I never put those words in people's mouth. I said, well, she said, I've got almost 6 years of my life in this relationship. But he's abusive, and he's negative, and he criticizes me all the time, and he runs me down, and he drinks, and I mean, it just never what I expected. And she's, as I say, a very nice woman, very smart, attractive. So I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, how long are you intending to live? I said, well, how do you mean? I said, well, you're 28 now, and so let's say you live the lifespan, average lifespan of females in our society, 80 years. How many years is that? 52? Yeah, it's 52 years. So now you have a choice. You can take the 5 years that have gone by, which is the past in your relationship, or you can look at the next 52 years. Do you want to be still in this situation for the rest of your life? She said, oh my God, like OMG, OMG. She said, oh my God, her eyes opened up. And I ran into her about a month later, and she was just shining. I said, how are you doing? She said, great. I said, you dumped the bastard, didn't you? She said, I sure did. She said, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in a negative situation like that. And so the mark of superior people, the top 10%, is they think about the future most of the time. Is they don't think about the past, because you can't change the past, but you can change the future by changing the present moment. You can change the future by making new decisions today and taking new actions today. It's almost like you've been driving, and no matter how far you've driven, it doesn't matter, but you can change the future by changing the wheel of your mental or emotional mind right now and go in a different direction. But you can't change the past. So sometimes people think that they've invested so much in the past. One of the great obstacles to change is investments of 3 kinds. One is investments of time. You've invested a lot of time in something and it hasn't worked out, and people are reluctant to let it go. But I say, if you've invested time in something and it hasn't worked out, and obviously it's not going to work out, then the question you ask is, if I were not now doing this, knowing what I now know, would I get into it? And this is something we teach in the Total Business Mastery Seminar, called zero-based thinking. If you were not now doing this, knowing what you now know, would you get into it? And I call it a Kwink analysis, K-W-I-N-K. Knowing what I now know, what would I do? And so I say to managers, if this person applied for their job again today, knowing what you now know, would you hire them? If the answer is no, then how do you get rid of them and how fast? If you would not get into a relationship that you're in today, knowing what you now know, then how do you get out and how fast? Because once I have found a situation fails the Kwink test, it's finished. It's unsavable. Can never be saved. People keep thinking, well, maybe something will happen, a miracle will happen. I like Peter Drucker's comment. He said that it's not that miracles don't happen, it's just that you can't count on them. And a lot of people think a miracle will happen and save them from all the mistakes that they've made or the time or money they've wasted. So just ask at every part of your life, is there anything that I'm doing today that, knowing what I now know, I wouldn't get into? And if the answer is no, then how do you get out and how fast? Going back to investments, the second investment is of money. We invest a lot of money in something and we lose our money. And what many people do is they throw good money after bad. They say, well, I've invested in this stock and it went down, so I'll buy more. Instead of saying, knowing what I now know, would I invest in that stock at all? Would I invest in that business at all? And if the answer is no, how do you get out and how fast? I have a friend who's a professional poker player, goes to Las Vegas and plays in the no-hold'em poker rooms. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they're quite interesting. They've got tables full of professional poker players, and they come from all over the place and they play poker all day long, 10, 12, 14 hours. Anyway, his observation was this. He said that once you've made a bet, as far as you're concerned, the money's gone. You don't get it back. You can't say, well, I really made a bad bet there, so can I take my money back and give you your cards back? No, that's not how it works. If you get your cards and you make a bet, and you get another card and you make a bet, and then a card comes up and you make a bet, and so on, is each time you make a bet, that money's gone forever. So what you do is you make every decision based on the cards that you have now, based on the cards on the table now. This becomes your criteria. And you ask yourself, knowing what I now know, with the cards the way they are now, would I have bet? And if the answer is no, it's time to fold. Know when to hold them and know when to fold them. If you would not bet, again, but always remember the money that you've put in is gone money. So in accounting, they have an expression called a sunk cost. Does anybody know what a sunk cost is? Well, a sunk cost is a cost that's gone forever. If you buy a piece of equipment and it's worn out and it's thrown away in the trash, it's a sunk cost. If you run an ad 6 months ago for your business, it's a sunk cost. It's not a capitalized cost. It's not part of your business. It's gone forever. It's like dropping a big anvil off a ship in the middle of the ocean. You can't just go get it back. It's gone. It's called a sunk. That's what they call it, a sunk cost. It's sunk. And it's amazing how many of us try to invest time or money or emotion to preserve a sunk cost or to try to get the sunk cost back, when in reality the time, money, emotion is gone. So the third type of investment is emotion. We put a lot of emotion into something, and it can be a career or a relationship or something else, and at the end of the day we realize that knowing what I now know is not a good investment. The emotion is gone, the investment is gone, so how do you get out and how fast? And here is the great discovery, is that when you finally make the decision to end a situation that knowing what you now know you wouldn't have gotten into in the first place, you'll only have one reaction afterwards, and it will be, why did I wait so long? Why did I wait so long to make this decision? Why did I hang in there for so long when I've known it was the wrong situation for such a long time? And so once you've decided you wouldn't get into it, now the only question is how much more are you going to suffer? How much longer? This is purely a personal choice. You could choose, well, I'm going to suffer for another 3 months or 6 months or a year. Just go ahead, suffer, suffer, suffer. And at the end, you will then fold your cards because it's over. It's over now. You already know it's over. In most cases where you use a zero-based thinking model, knowing what I now know, there are situations in our life that knowing what we now know we wouldn't get into. So the question is, the question is, knowing what you now know, would you get into it? Well, let's look at the worry buster. Negative imagination is thinking about things we don't want to happen that cause enormous amounts of stress and distress. In other words, we worry about things. We call it negative imagination. We're imagining things that we don't even want to happen. So we say, so negative imagination. We say worry creates fear, which can be described as fantasized experiences appearing real. Fantasized experiences appearing real. Because here's some of the discoveries that they've done with regard to worry. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. It's a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. In other words, you're not in, you're not out. You do it, you don't do it. And so the only real cure for worry, as we'll come to, is decisive action. Get busy, take action, move forward. You see, the mind can only hold one thing at a time, positive or negative. If you get so busy working on your situation, you don't have time to worry anymore. So a study was done on the things that people worry about. 40% of the worries people had never happened. 30% of the things were in the past for which nothing could be done. 12% were needless worries about health. And 10% were petty worries about little things. Did I park the car right? Did I leave my stuff in the car? Did I bring everything for the seminar? Only 8% of the worries were about something substantial, and of those, 4% were out of their control. So basically what we find is that 96% of what you worry about is a waste of emotion. There's a businessman who never worried about anything, and they said, why don't you worry? He said, I do worry. He said, I worry for 1 hour every Saturday morning. And what I do during the week is when I think of something that I'm worried about, I write it on a piece of paper, and I put it into this box. And then I don't think about it till Saturday morning. At 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, I go and get out the box, and I just go through all the things I was supposed to worry about during the week. And surprise, surprise, by Saturday morning, 80-90% of them have disappeared. So he says, I'm going to worry, just not now. I'm just going to worry. I'm going to have a worry time on Saturday morning. And as a result, he never ends up worrying. And you should do the same thing. Just take a little box or an envelope. Whenever you think of something you're worried about, write it on the envelope and say, I'll have worry time on that later. But you'll notice if you get really busy, you forget to worry. You can be busy all day long and you forget to worry all day long. You think, oh my God, it's 5 o'clock. I haven't worried about that all day. I've got to get some wood on the fire. I've got to get it burning again. I've got to think about it and get myself worked up. So to eliminate worry, live one day at a time. That's one of the great rules. Live one day at a time. Get the facts. Before you start worrying, there's a rule that says, just for today, I will remain calm. Just for today, I will not think about the things that make me upset. Just for today. And anybody can live one day at a time. In Dale Carnegie's famous book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, the very first day, he talks about living in day-tight compartments. The very first chapter, he says, the key to not worrying is to live one day at a time. And don't worry about things that may happen in the distant future. In the Bible it said, sufficient unto the day are the cares thereof. So just be concerned about what's happening today, which is under your control. The second is to get the facts. Many times we get upset or angry about something because, or we worry about something because we don't have the facts. We have a half fact or we have a partial fact. And so the first thing you do is ask what exactly has happened. And you ask the questions. And how has this happened? And what is the situation? And what's going on? And you find it is impossible to worry while you're asking questions and trying to get more information because of the law of substitution. So you focus on asking questions. And you ask several people, what has happened here? Until you have a very clear idea. And very often you'll find there's nothing to worry about. Very often you'll find that what you thought you needed to be concerned about is really not a problem at all. In fact, you may have even had the wrong facts when you started worrying about it. The third thing you can do is use the worry buster technique. Now the worry buster technique is one of the greatest techniques ever discovered. It's a life changer. It changes people's thinking forever. It's certainly been very helpful to me. Is you define the worry situation clearly in writing. So let us say that you're having severe financial problems. Then write down clearly, my problem is that I need X number of dollars by May 31st, and I only have X number of dollars, so I'm this many dollars short. In other words, get clarity about the worry situation. Many people are worried about something, but it's very vague and turbulent in the back of their mind. So when you're forced to think on paper, think on paper, think on paper, 50% of all worries are cured when you write down what you're worried about in the first place. If you're working with other people and you have 3 or 4 people in a discussion and you're all worried about something, you say, all right, exactly what is it that we are worried about? All 4 will have a different definition. So all 4 of you are trying to solve a problem situation, but none of you are really clear about what it is until you write it down. So we use a flip chart or a whiteboard and write it down so everybody agrees with the definition. Once everybody agrees with the definition, often the solution just pops out. The second thing that you do with the worry buster, and coming back to yourself as an individual, is determine the worst possible outcome of the situation. We call this the YPO, the WPO, worst possible outcome. What is the worst thing that can possibly happen as a result of this worry situation? And whatever it is, you say, well, it's something you can live with. It may even be the worst possible situation is that you'll die, all right? Now, if that's the worst possible thing that can happen, no matter what, well, then what you do is you say, all right, well, if that happens, it happens. And so number 3 is you resolve to accept the worst should it occur. We run out of money by the end of the month, or I could die from an incurable illness, or the house will burn to the ground or something else. So you say, okay, if it does happen, then I will accept it. And it's interesting, resistance to a negative situation is the major cause of stress. Once you say, okay, if it happens, it happens. You know, there's that famous story about George Burns. And let me see if I can, no, it wasn't George Burns, but it might as well have been George Burns. This older gentleman goes to his doctor, he's about 80 years old, goes to his doctor and he wants to get a complete medical. And he also wants his fiancée to get a complete medical as well before they get married. His fiancée is 26. And he's about 80 years old, and he's wealthy, and she's 26, and obviously just a loving person. Anyway, Anyway, the doctor looks at this situation and does the medical on both of them, and he says, you know, Sam, could I talk to you? I've been your doctor for many years. He said, Sam, he said, you know, getting married at your age, you know that vigorous sexual activity can be fatal. And he said, well, he says, if she dies, she dies. In other words, resolve to accept the worst should it occur. If she dies, she dies. By the way, the George Burns' story was he was 80 years old, and they said, Mr. Burns, what would you like people to be saying about you 50 years from now? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? He said, well, 50 years from now, I want them to be saying, George Burns just happily celebrated his 130th birthday. Anyway, so resolve to accept the worst. The interesting thing is it's like deflating a balloon, is once you resolve to accept the worst, all the tension goes away. You don't have any tension, and your mind clears and goes calm. Okay, the business goes broke, it won't kill me. If the house burns down, we get another house. If they lose all our money, we lose all our money. In other words, just accept it. And then, number 4, begin immediately to improve upon the worst. They teach this, by the way, in the universities. They call it the minimax regret analysis. They say minimize the maximum possible regret. And so business people are taught, when they make a decision, is to say, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen here, and how can we minimize the maximum? How can we minimize the very worst thing that we do? So the worry buster is very powerful. Whenever you find yourself worried, say, wait a minute, what am I worried about? What's the worst possible outcome? What's the WPO here? And if you want to help other people, there's a wonderful observation. We say you become what you think about. You also become what you teach. And one of the fastest ways to internalize these ideas so that you think this way is to teach other people. When they have a situation of concern, say exactly what it is that you are worried about. And then what's the worst that could possibly happen? And so if that were to happen, would it kill you? If the answer is no, so now what could you do to improve upon the worst? J. Paul Getty was famous for saying whenever he went into a business deal, the first thing he would do is say, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? He said, and then make darn sure it doesn't happen. And he would have his executives make darn sure that the worst possible thing doesn't happen. So begin immediately to improve upon the worst. And sometimes by simply facing it squarely, you can solve the worry situation quickly. All right, worry is a form of negative goal setting. It's setting goals for things that you absolutely don't want to happen. Thinking and talking about what you don't want to happen. And remember the law of cause and effect, the law of attraction, law of correspondence, law of belief, all these laws are neutral. They work with devastating effect on negative goals, just like they work with wonderful effect on positive goals. So if you're really worried about something, actually you're setting up a force field of energy to attract that into your life. There are some people who seem to always have bad luck. They seem to always have difficulties in their lives. But when you talk to them for 5 minutes, you know why. Because that's all they talk about. All they think about is possible negative things that could happen. Or negative things that have already happened that they can't do anything about, which they just keep rehashing. 6, worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. One of the most powerful techniques, which we talked about, is decisiveness. Make a decision. You'll learn tomorrow why decisiveness is so important. But decisiveness is so powerful. It gives you so much control. And the only real antidote to worry is purposeful action. So what I want you to do is use the law of substitution. The law of substitution says get so busy working on your goals that you don't have time to worry. And the interesting thing is that if you get so busy working on a goal, minimizing the worst that can happen, soon you reach the point where you just don't worry anymore. Remember, worry is something you probably learned from a parent. One of your parents taught you to worry because they worried all the time. And they worried about little things and big things and little things and big things. And you grew up with a worldview that worrying is what you do when you're an adult. And the other thing is the higher your self-esteem, the more you like yourself, the less you worry about things. People who worry about things think that if something goes wrong, it's a reflection on them. Something fails or it doesn't work out. And you have to say, no, if things just don't work out, it's not a reflection on you. Just because you fail when you try something, which is much better than trying nothing, doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that you're a learner. Interesting point in America. Some of the most admired people in America are the entrepreneurs who started from nothing and built great fortunes. 3 or 4 who come to mind are, of course, Bill Gates, and then Warren Buffett, and Larry Ellison of Oracle, and Michael Dell, and then the Waltons. 5 of the Bill Walton or Sam Walton's descendants are among the 5 richest people in the world. Nobody knows how, but he was able to split his entire $100 million worth of fortune amongst 4 kids and 1 wife, 20 million each. And nobody knows how, and the documents, all the trust documents were sealed. No taxes. It passed, everything passed straight to his relatives with no taxes, none of those massive 55% taxes. And they sealed the agreement with the IRS. I don't know what it was. They sealed it, and nobody's ever been able to see it. Did you know that? That's one of those factoids, little facts of very little value, but nice to have. The interesting thing about these people is that these are successful entrepreneurs, and everybody's happy about them. In America, we really, really admire people who try and fail. We were talking about this the other day. If somebody tries a business and you meet them a year later, said, "How'd your business go?" I said, "It went bust, lost everything." Geez, you say, "Wow, that must have been a great experience. What did you learn? What are you going to do next?" In other words, there's no negativity about going broke in a business. The only person who feels really bad about it is probably you. For other people, what they're going to have for lunch is more important than the fact that you are bankrupt and living out of your car. What we do is we admire successful people. We admire them, and we look at learning from them. In Italy, if you start a business, like if you're in a barber shop and you go broke, it's published in the paper like you're a criminal wanted for child molestation. This is what you did. It's an awful thing. It's an embarrassment to your family. You often have to leave that city and go and live somewhere else. You're not allowed to start another business for 10 years because you went broke in your business. In other words, it's a real badge of shame to have tried a business and started. That's why the level of entrepreneurship in European countries is very low. Whereas here, you can start a business, go broke on Friday, start a new one on Monday. And you can start it online for $49.95 with LegalZoom, and you're in business. Even before you can get business cards printed, which you can do online as well. and you could be in business on Monday morning. There, you may have to stay on the sidelines for a decade before you're allowed to start another business. So therefore, never be concerned about failing, and never let the possibility of failing hold you back.